"I want to thank everyone," he said, his voice smooth and confident as he raised his glass. "I founded this business from scratch, and I'm proud of what we've achieved." The words hung in the air for a moment, in the expensive, softly lit restaurant that smelled of seared steak and money. He was looking directly at the investors, his eyes earnest, his smile practiced. "My son, Daniel." The applause started, a polite but firm patter of hands from men in tailored suits. They were clapping for him, for his story. Not one of them looked at me. It was as if I was a ghost at the table, a piece of decorative furniture, a cold, sharp sensation, like swallowing a shard of ice, slid down my throat. But my face, I know my face, remained perfectly still. I've had years of practice keeping it that way. My hands, resting in my lap, didn't tremble. I simply reached forward, picked up my heavy silver fork, and placed it gently down on the white porcelain plate beside my unfinished meal. It made a small, clear clink, a full stop, the end of a sentence. In that moment, the dinner was over for me. Everything was over, and something new was about to begin. Later that night, long after the false smiles and handshakes had ended, I heard him talking to his wife, Amelia. I was walking down the hall to my room, the thick carpet silencing my steps. His study door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light cutting through the darkness. His voice wasn't the confident baritone he used for investors. It was low, conspiratorial. "It's time for her to retire," he said. "She just doesn't understand anything anymore." The first lie, the one at the dinner table, was for the world. It was a theft of my legacy. This one, was for himself. It was the justification, the poison he fed himself to make the theft feel like a mercy. He wasn't stealing from his mother. He was saving the company from a doddering old woman. That was the story he was writing, and in it, I was the frail, confused epilogue. He had no idea that I was, and always had been, the author of the entire book. I didn't say a word. I didn't push the door open or confront him. That's not my way. Anger is a hot, messy fire. It burns out quickly. What I felt was something cold and dense, like a block of granite settling in my chest. It was clarity. I turned and walked, not to my bedroom, but to the library at the far end of the house, to the old black iron safe hidden behind a false panel of books. My fingers trembled slightly as I spun the combination dial, not from age or fear, but from a strange, resurfacing memory. Click, 22. The age I was when I sold my grandmother's necklace to pay for my first business license. Click, 10. The number of times I was rejected for a bank loan because I was a woman. Click, 64. The year I finally paid off the last of those predatory high-interest loans I was forced to take. The heavy door swung open with a deep, groaning sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the house. My house, the one I bought with the first $1 million profit. Inside, beneath dusty stock certificates and old property deeds, was a simple, worn leather folio. I pulled it out. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside, but I did. I carried it to my late husband's old desk, switched on the small green banker's lamp, and laid the papers out on the polished wood. Articles of incorporation for Sterling Enterprises. And there, at the bottom of the first page, in faded blue ink, was the truth. Founder and sole proprietor, Catherine Sterling. My signature, a little more flamboyant than it is now, but unmistakably mine. I sat there for a long time, just looking at it, The room was silent except for the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick felt like a second of my life being erased by the lie my son had told. I founded this business from scratch. Scratch? Was that what he called the 2-bedroom apartment I converted into an office, where I worked 18-hour days while he was at nursery school? Was scratch the inheritance my father left me, every penny of which I poured into payroll and inventory instead of a new car or a proper vacation? I remembered the smell of that first office. It smelled of stale coffee, cheap paper, and overwhelming fear. The fear of failure was a constant companion. It sat on my shoulder as I cold-called potential clients, and it lay beside me at night when I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with numbers and logistics. But beneath the fear was something else, something stronger, a relentless, burning drive. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a future, a fortress for my son, a world where he would never have to know that kind of fear. And I had succeeded. I built him a world of privilege, of easy confidence, of private schools and European holidays. I gave him a kingdom and handed him the title of CEO 10 years ago, thinking I was giving him a gift, a legacy. I see now I gave him a weapon, and he had just aimed it at my heart. He was right about one thing. I hadn't understood. I hadn't understood that by protecting him from the struggle, I had made him weak. He hadn't learned how to build, only how to occupy what was already built. And now, he felt entitled, not just to the fruits of my labor, but to the labor itself. He wanted the glory of the climb without ever having taken a single step. I traced my name on the document with my finger. Catherine Sterling, not Daniel's mother, not the old woman who doesn't understand. Founder, architect. I felt the granite in my chest harden into steel. The grief I should have felt for my son, the boy I had loved, was pushed aside by a cold, clear purpose. He saw me as a relic, a problem to be managed. He had made a classic business error. He had underestimated his predecessor, and in doing so, he had just made himself a threat to my company's stability, a liability. My gaze fell on the phone on the corner of the desk. I knew the number by heart. Arthur, my lawyer, the same man who had stood beside me, a fresh-faced junior partner back then, when I first signed these documents. He was an old man now, like me, but he, of all people, remembered the truth. He remembered whose name was on the paper. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool wood of the desk, my desk, in my library, in my house, built by my company. He seemed to have forgotten a fundamental principle, one I had taught him myself when he was just a boy with a business degree. You can't run a company when you don't own the assets. And he, my son, my foolish, arrogant son, was about to receive a very stark, very public lesson in corporate governance. He thought I didn't understand anything anymore. Oh, I understood. I understood exactly what had to be done. I was going to remove the liability. I was going to protect my company. I picked up the phone. It was well past midnight, but I knew Arthur would answer. He always did. The phone felt cold and heavy in my hand, a solid piece of black plastic from a time before everything became sleek and weightless. It was 3 a.m. The grandfather clock in the hall had just chimed. In the silence that followed, I held my breath. For a moment, a wave of something almost like grief washed over me. The image of Daniel as a little boy, his hand tucked in mine, flashed in my mind. The son I had raised, the future I had built for him. And then I remembered his words, spoken with such casual cruelty. She just doesn't understand anything anymore. The grief receded, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of the task ahead. This wasn't about a mother and her son anymore. This was about a founder and a failing CEO. I didn't dial right away. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, walked to the kitchen, and started the coffee maker. The familiar ritual grounded me. The scent of dark roast coffee filling the quiet house, the low gurgle of the machine, these were the constants in my life. As I waited, I looked out the large kitchen window at my garden, shrouded in the pre-dawn darkness. I planted every rosebush out there myself. I knew where the roots ran deep, just like I knew where the roots of my company were buried. Daniel had forgotten. He'd been living in the beautiful house for so long, he'd forgotten who laid the foundation. With a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand, I returned to the library. The founding documents were still laid out on the desk, a sacred text under the lamplight. I sat down, took a slow, deliberate sip of the hot liquid, and picked up the phone again. This time, I dialed. I didn't need to look up the number. Arthur's home number has been committed to my memory for over 30 years. It rang 3 times. His voice, when he answered, was thick with sleep but instantly alert. Yes? Arthur. It's Catherine. There was a pause, not of confusion, but of comprehension. In that short silence, I knew he understood everything. He was the only other person alive who knew the whole story, who had seen the sweat and the tears, who had reviewed the contracts I signed with shaking hands in the dead of night. He knew I would never call him at this hour unless the foundation itself was cracking. Catherine, he said, his voice now clear and sharp. What do you need? I didn't waste time with pleasantries or explanations. This was business. Arthur, I need you to pull our original incorporation documents, the ones we filed in 1988. I want you to draft a resolution for an emergency board meeting. The sole item on the agenda will be the immediate removal and replacement of the CEO. Another pause, shorter this time. I could hear the rustle of sheets as he sat up in bed. I could picture him, a man of precise habits, already switching on his bedside lamp, his legal mind clicking into gear. Whose name are we putting forward as the interim replacement? He asked, his tone professional, devoid of surprise. My own, I said. The words felt solid, real. I'm exercising my rights as the majority shareholder and founder. Of course, he said. The bylaws are clear. Your vote is the only one that truly matters. When do you want to hold this meeting? I looked at the clock. It was nearly 4 a.m. Today, at the office, 11 a.m. sharp. I want everything legally ironclad. No loopholes, no challenges. I want it to be clean, swift, and final. It will be, he promised. I'll have the papers couriered to the office by 10. Catherine, I'm sorry it's come to this. I'm not, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I'm fixing a problem. Thank you, Arthur. I hung up the phone. The first pillar was in place. The blitzkrieg, as the military men would say, had begun. I drank my coffee, watching as the first faint, gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The world was waking up, but my world had been awake all night. My mind was a chessboard, and I was seeing every move. 10 steps ahead, Daniel would be sleeping soundly, dreaming his dreams of triumph, completely unaware that his reign was already over. He just didn't know it yet. At 8:30 a.m., just as the sun was casting long shadows across the lawn, I made the second call. This one required a different touch, not a command, but an alliance. I dialed Richard's direct line. He was the only one left on the board from the old days. He'd been my first head of sales, a young, hungry man who believed in my vision when no one else did. He had seen me at my worst, haggard and exhausted, and at my best, closing the deal that put us on the map. He, more than anyone, knew Daniel had been handed a crown he had never earned. At the dinner last night, when the investors were applauding, I had caught his eye. I saw it clearly. Shame. He was ashamed of Daniel's lie and ashamed of his own silence. He answered on the first ring. Richard speaking. Richard, it's Catherine Sterling. Catherine, he said, and there was a warmth in his voice, but also a note of tension. He knew this wasn't a social call. It was good to see you last night. Was it, Richard? I asked quietly. Did you enjoy the speech? A heavy sigh came through the receiver. No, I did not. It was wrong. I agree, I said, which is why I'm calling. I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for 11 a.m. today. I'm going to be there. You are? The surprise in his voice was genuine. I hadn't set foot in a board meeting in 5 years. Yes, and I need to know I have your support. I need your voice. Richard, do you remember who founded this company? It was a rhetorical question, but I let it hang in the air. I was asking for more than his vote. I was asking him to stand by the truth we both knew, to honor the history he had been a part of. Catherine, he said, his voice low and firm. I remember the leaky roof in our first office. I remember you using your own car to make deliveries because we couldn't afford a van. Of course I remember. I'll be there. You have my voice. Thank you, Richard, I said. That's all I needed to hear. I hung up. The second pillar was in place. My legal authority and my moral support. The rest of the board would fall in line. They were new, appointed by Daniel. They were loyal to the position of CEO, not the person. When the position was no longer his, their loyalty would shift. It was the simple, brutal calculus of corporate life. At 9 o'clock, I went upstairs to my dressing room. It was time to prepare for battle. My closet is organized by color, a habit from a lifetime of needing to be efficient. My hand drifted past the section of black suits. Black was for mourning, for funerals. This was not a funeral. This was a resurrection. I passed the grays, the color of compromise and ambiguity. There would be no compromise today. Then I saw it. A dark navy blue suit. The wool was impeccable, the cut sharp and timeless. I hadn't worn it in years. I had bought it for the meeting where I secured the Peterson contract, the deal that transformed us from a small local player into a national name. I remembered walking into that boardroom full of skeptical men, feeling the fabric of this suit like a suit of armor. It gave me confidence. It projected authority. I took it off the hanger. It still fit perfectly. As I buttoned the jacket, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I didn't see a woman in her 70s. I didn't see a mother betrayed by her son. I saw Catherine Sterling, the founder and chairman of Sterling Enterprises. The concentration I felt was absolute. Every lingering trace of sentimentality had been burned away, leaving only a cold, efficient purpose. Daniel thought I was a relic from the past. He was about to learn that the past had teeth. The house was in order. My house. Now, it was time to go to the office and tidy up his. I drove myself to the office. I didn't call for the company car that Daniel now used. I took my own, the old but immaculate Mercedes I'd bought myself 15 years ago. My hands were steady on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The morning traffic was light. I watched the familiar cityscape slide by, the glass and steel towers glinting in the sunday. So many of those buildings housed companies I had competed with, companies I had partnered with, companies I had beaten. I knew this landscape. I had helped to shape it. As I pulled into the underground garage, I parked in my old spot, the one right next to the elevator. marked Chairman. A fine layer of dust covered the sign. Daniel had probably thought it was a quaint, sentimental tribute. He never understood it was a statement of fact, not history. Walking into the lobby of Sterling Enterprises was like stepping into a perfectly preserved memory. The scent was the same, a faint, clean mix of lemon polish and recycled paper. The marble floors gleamed. The large abstract painting I'd commissioned from a young, unknown artist 30 years ago still hung on the far wall. It was worth a fortune now. I'd always had a good eye for investments. The young woman at the reception desk, someone I didn't recognize, looked up with a practiced, bright smile. "Good morning. Welcome to Sterling Enterprises. How may I help you?" "I'm here for the 11 o'clock board meeting," I said calmly. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She looked at me, a well-dressed woman of a certain age, and her brain tried to categorize me. "A client? A vendor? And your name, ma'am?" "Catherine Sterling." The name landed in the quiet lobby with the force of a physical object. Her eyes widened. She knew the name, of course. It was on the building. But she had never connected it to a living, breathing person standing in front of her. She fumbled with her keyboard, her composure gone. Of course, Mrs. Sterling, I'm so sorry I didn't." "It's quite all right," I said, giving her a small, tight smile. "Just let them know I'm on my way up." I didn't wait for her to announce me. I walked to the executive elevator and used the old keycard I still kept on my ring. It beeped green. My access had never been revoked. An oversight on Daniel's part? He saw me as a figurehead, a portrait on the wall. He'd forgotten that the portrait still held all the keys to the castle. I didn't go to his office, the grand corner suite that used to be mine. I went directly to the boardroom. It was empty and silent, the long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. I ran my hand over its cool, smooth surface. I remembered choosing this table. I remembered the arguments over its cost. I had insisted. I knew that power needed a proper stage. At that exact moment, I knew what was happening 20 floors below. It was 10 a.m. I had timed it perfectly. I could picture him so clearly. He'd be on his second cup of coffee, feeling expansive, triumphant after the success of last night's dinner. He'd be dictating emails to his secretary, Sarah, a capable woman I had hired years ago. He'd be using the royal "we," as in, we need to fast-track the Singapore expansion. He always loved that word. It made him feel like a monarch. Then, Sarah would have entered, a single sheet of paper in her hand, a formal inter-office memo. "Mr. Sterling, this just arrived from legal," she would say. He would take it with a hint of irritation, a distraction from his grand plans. He would glance at the heading, "Notice of Emergency Board of Directors Meeting." His brow would furrow. He hated surprises. They disrupted the neat narrative of control he'd built for himself. Then he would read the single line on the agenda: "To discuss and vote upon the current leadership and position of Chief Executive Officer." I could imagine the sequence of his reactions as if I were watching him on a screen. First, a flash of hot annoyance. Who dared to call a meeting about him without his permission? It had to be a mistake. A clerical error. He'd probably let out a short, dismissive laugh. Then, he would have reached for the most reliable tool in his arsenal, the one that had solved every problem his entire life: his mother. He would have picked up his phone, his thumb tapping my name on his speed dial, a confident smirk on his face. He'd be ready to deliver a patronizing, gently chiding lecture. "Mom, what on earth is this joke your friend Arthur is playing? You need to tell him to stop wasting my time." In the boardroom, my purse vibrated on the table beside me. I looked at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I watched the screen go dark as it switched to voicemail. I felt the vibration against the mahogany, a frantic, insistent buzzing that was all his dawning panic. He would have stared at his phone in disbelief. I always answered his calls. The first crack in his perfect, ordered world would have appeared. He would have tried again, immediately. The second call came through. I silenced it with a single touch. Now the annoyance would be curdling into something else. Unease, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He was no longer in control of the situation. He was playing a game with his mother. He was about to find out he was in a corporate war with the founder. His next call, I knew, would be to Arthur. He would be blustering, trying to project the authority he felt slipping through his fingers. "Arthur, what the hell is this? Who authorized this meeting? It's completely irregular." And Arthur, my loyal, precise Arthur, would have been the perfect stone wall. I could hear his calm, dry voice on the other end of the line. "Good morning, Daniel." The meeting was called in accordance with the company's bylaws. All necessary protocols have been observed. "By whose authority?" Daniel would have demanded, his voice rising. "By the authority of the majority shareholder," Arthur would have replied, his tone unchanging. And in that moment, Daniel would have understood. It wouldn't be a full, complete understanding, but the seed of a terrifying truth would have been planted. He would have felt the floor beneath his feet shift, become unstable. The power he thought was his, that he had so proudly claimed as his own creation, was never really his at all. It was on loan, and the loan had just been called in. I sat there, in the quiet, empty boardroom, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city. I was not angry. I was not sad. I felt a profound, almost chilling sense of calm. The machine I had built was working exactly as I had designed it. For years I had allowed him to think he was the one at the controls. It was easier that way. But he had forgotten who built the engine. He had forgotten who held the master key. The memo on his desk wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a mirror, and for the first time in his adult life, it was showing him his true position. He was not the king, and he was about to be summoned for an audience with the queen. The minutes before 11 o'clock stretched into a strange, elastic silence. I sat alone at the head of the table, my back to the panoramic window that overlooked the city I had conquered. I didn't look at the view. My focus was on the door. I had asked Arthur to have copies of the original founding documents and the relevant sections of the corporate bylaws placed at every seat. They lay there, crisp and white, against the dark wood, small paper tombstones marking the end of an era. The other board members began to file in. First came the 2 Daniel had appointed last year, a tech venture capitalist with a trendy haircut and a former marketing executive from a rival firm. They saw me, and a look of polite confusion passed between them. They knew who I was, of course, the matriarch, the emeritus figure. They probably assumed I was there for some sentimental ceremony. They nodded respectfully, murmuring, "Mrs. Sterling," before taking their seats, their eyes sliding curiously over the documents in front of them. Then came Richard. He walked in, his face grim but resolute. He met my gaze across the length of the table and gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all I needed. He sat to my right, opened the folio before him, and began to read, even though he already knew what it said. He was preparing himself, reinforcing his position. Finally, the door opened again, and Daniel strode in. He was trying to project an aura of command, but I could see the cracks in his facade. His movements were too sharp, his smile too tight. He was wearing what he called his power suit, a charcoal gray affair that suddenly looked a size too big for him. He saw me at the head of the table, in his chair, and he stopped dead for a second. The carefully constructed mask of the CEO slipped, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the face of a startled, resentful boy. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Mother, what a surprise. I see you've decided to grace us with your presence. To what do we owe the honor?" He was playing to the room, trying to frame me as a dotty old woman making a charmingly unexpected visit. He walked to the head of the table, clearly expecting me to move. I didn't. I simply looked at him, my hands folded calmly on the table in front of me. He was forced to take the seat to my left, the spot usually reserved for the COO. The subtle shift in power was immediate and palpable. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Well," Daniel said, clearing his throat and trying to seize control. "Since we're all here, let's call this emergency meeting to order. I, for one, am very keen to understand the urgency." He shot a pointed, angry look at Arthur, who sat impassively at the far end of the table, a silent observer. He was about to continue, to launch into a speech that would try to dominate the room and reassert his authority. I didn't give him the chance. "Daniel," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "Allow me." All eyes turned to me. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint whisper of the air conditioning. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He was so accustomed to being the center of every room, he was momentarily stunned into silence by the simple act of being interrupted. I slowly reached for the copy of the founding documents in front of me. I didn't open it. I simply placed my hand on the cover. 32 years ago, I began, my voice even and measured. I sat in a cramped, rented office with Arthur and signed this document. It was the birth certificate of Sterling Enterprises. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member. Last night, at a dinner with our key investors, Daniel informed them that he founded this business from scratch. A lie. A blatant, foolish lie told to erase history and steal a legacy he was given, not one he earned. Daniel flushed a deep mottled red. "Now hold on," he sputtered. "That was just rhetoric. For the investors, you're twisting things." "Am I?" I let the question hang in the air. "Let's look at the facts, shall we?" This company was not built on rhetoric. It was built on capital, strategy, and legally binding agreements. I opened the folio and turned a single page. I didn't need to look for the clause. I knew it by heart. I had written it myself, a failsafe for a future I could never have predicted would be this one. I placed my index finger firmly on the paper. According to the corporate bylaws, specifically Article 7, Section 3, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble in the lobby. As the founder and holder of the controlling interest of this company, a 51% stake which I have never relinquished, I retain the unilateral right to call for the immediate dismissal of any executive officer, including the CEO, in the event of actions that cause material or reputational damage to the corporation. I lifted my finger from the page and looked directly at him. You stood before our financial partners and publicly falsified the very foundation of this company. That is reputational damage of the highest order. It suggests our leadership is dishonest. It exposes us to ridicule. It is an act of profound corporate malpractice. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The tech investor was staring at the page in front of him, his mouth slightly agape. He was no fool. He understood the brutal finality of a majority shareholder clause. Daniel looked desperately around the table, searching for an ally. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking. She's not been involved for years. She doesn't understand the current market dynamics." "Richard?" He turned to his last hope. Richard, his godfather, the man who had known him since he was a baby. Richard didn't look at Daniel. He looked at me. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice filled with a sad, weary gravity. I was there last night. I heard what was said, and I have just reread the bylaws. I support Mrs. Sterling's decision. That was the final blow. The moment Richard spoke, the last of the air went out of Daniel's balloon. The other two board members immediately looked down at the table, their faces neutral masks. Their allegiance had shifted. They were now loyal to me. Daniel turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and panic. The CEO was gone. All that was left was my son. Mom, he whispered, the word a desperate plea. You can't do this. This is my life, my company. No, I said softly, but with absolute finality. It was never your company. It was mine, and you were its steward. You have proven yourself to be a poor one. I stood up, my chair making a soft, scraping sound on the floor. Effective immediately, your employment with Sterling Enterprises is terminated. Arthur has your severance package. Your security access will be revoked in 1 hour. We're done here. I looked at him one last time, at the wreckage of the man who had been my son. There was no triumph in me, only a deep, aching sense of necessity. The feeling of a surgeon who has just completed a difficult, painful, but life-saving amputation. The board meeting is adjourned, I said to the silent room, and with that, I turned and walked out, leaving him to sit alone at the table I had bought, in the company I had built. Walking out of that boardroom felt like stepping out of a pressurized chamber into clean, open air. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see. The stunned, shattered face of my son, the averted gazes of the board members, the quiet, professional movements of Arthur gathering his papers. That chapter was closed, the final word written. My destination wasn't the CEO's office, his office. It was the small, unassuming office next to it that had always been reserved for the chairman. It had been used as a storage room for the last few years, filled with outdated computer monitors and boxes of old marketing materials. I opened the door. The air was stale, smelling of dust and forgotten things. But the window was large, and the morning light poured in, illuminating the particles dancing in the air. This was all I needed, a space to think, a command center. I wasn't interested in reclaiming the throne. I was here to stabilize the kingdom. Richard appeared at the doorway a few minutes later, his expression a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. Catherine, he said quietly, it's done. No, Richard, I replied, turning from the window to face him. It's just begun. The easy part is over. He looked puzzled. What do you mean? Removing a bad leader is a simple, if painful, act. Building a good future is the real work. I need you to assemble all the department heads. The VPs of sales, operations, finance, R&D. Have them meet me in the main conference room in 1 hour. All of them? He asked, surprised. What are you going to tell them? The truth, I said. It's time this company remembered what that sounds like. An hour later, I walked into that conference room. It was a larger, less formal space than the boardroom, a place for work, not for pronouncements. The dozen or so men and women assembled there were the true engine of Sterling Enterprises. They were the ones who managed the supply chains, who inspired the sales teams, who balanced the books. They were also tense, their faces etched with uncertainty. The news had clearly ripped through the executive floors like a shockwave. The king was gone. They didn't know if they were about to be facing a firing squad or a new monarch. I walked to the front of the room, but remained standing. I didn't take a seat at the head of the table. I wanted to be on their level. Good morning, I began. my voice calm and clear. "I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. Let me be direct. As of 11:15 this morning, Daniel Sterling is no longer the CEO of this company. I, as the founder and chairman of the board, have resumed temporary operational oversight." A nervous silence filled the room. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop. They were waiting for me to announce my own succession, to install a new crony, to continue the same pattern of nepotism they had grown accustomed to under Daniel. "I know what you're thinking," I continued, looking from face to face. "You're wondering what this means for you, for the company. You're wondering who's next. Let me be clear about that, too. I am not here to take over. My time running the day-to-day operations of this company is long past. I am here to do one thing, to correct the course." I paused, letting them absorb that. For the past several years, this company has been operating under the wrong principles. Promotions have been based on loyalty rather than merit. Ideas have been valued based on who proposed them, not on their potential. A culture of personality has replaced our culture of performance. That ends today. I saw a flicker of something in their eyes. Hope, the woman who ran R&D, a brilliant chemist Daniel had consistently overlooked because he found her too abrasive, straightened her shoulders. The VP of operations, a man who had been fighting for a much-needed system overhaul for years, leaned forward in his chair. "The CEO's office is currently empty," I said, gesturing vaguely in its direction, "and it will remain empty for now. I am not looking for a replacement. I am looking for a leader, and that leader may very well be in this room." A quiet gasp went through the room. This was corporate heresy compared to Daniel's top-down authoritarian style. For the next 90 days, this company will be run by you, by a leadership committee, which I will chair. We will make decisions collectively. We will listen to the people on the factory floors and the sales associates in the field. We are going to open the doors and the windows of this place and let some fresh air in. We are going to find and fix the problems Daniel ignored, and we are going to amplify the successes he took for granted. And at the end of those 90 days, I concluded, the board will begin a formal, nationwide search for a new CEO. We will interview the best and the brightest candidates in the country. And any of you who feel you are ready for that role will be given a fair and thorough consideration based on your performance during this interim period. The throne is not inherited in this company. Not anymore. It is earned. It was as if a great, collective breath was exhaled. The tension in the room didn't just dissipate. It transformed into a palpable energy, a crackle of excitement. I had not come in with an axe, but with a blueprint. I hadn't come to purge, but to empower. I spent the rest of that day in a series of one-on-one meetings. I listened more than I spoke. I heard about the frustrations, the stifled projects, the brilliant ideas that had been gathering dust in desk drawers. It was like finding a beautiful, overgrown garden. The soil was still rich, the plants still strong, but they had been choked by weeds of ego and neglect. All I needed to do was pull the weeds and let the sun back in. Late in the afternoon, my secretary, a young, efficient woman named Maria, knocked on the door of my temporary office. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice hesitant. "Your son, Mr. Sterling, is on the line. He's asking to speak with you." I looked at the phone on my desk. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old instinct, the mother's impulse to answer, to soothe, to manage the fallout. But I was not just his mother anymore. I was the guardian of this company and its people. "Tell him I am in a meeting, Maria," I said gently. Tell him I will call him back when I have a moment, at home. This is a place of business. I had saved my company. I had reclaimed my legacy, but my relationship with my son, that was a different kind of wreckage. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was something I could never rebuild. Some foundations, once broken, can never be repaired. All you can do is build something new and stronger in its place. And that is what I had started to do. The empty CEO's chair wasn't a symbol of loss. It was a symbol of a promise, a new beginning, earned by merit for anyone with the courage to step up and lead. The 90 days I gave myself passed like a season changing. The initial chill of uncertainty in the office thawed into a spring of renewed energy. The meetings I chaired were no longer pronouncements from on high. They were lively, sometimes messy, debates. Ideas, good and bad, were put on the table, examined, and refined. People who had been silent for years started speaking up, their voices gaining confidence. We were no longer just a company. We were a team again. The garden was being tended, and it was beginning to bloom. The search for a new CEO was exhaustive and national. Arthur and Richard helped me vet dozens of candidates. We weren't looking for a charismatic speaker or a ruthless cost cutter. We were looking for a builder, someone who understood that a company's foundation isn't its stock price, but its people and its principles. We found her in a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was the COO of a smaller, innovative competitor, a woman in her late 40s with a quiet intensity and eyes that missed nothing. During her interview, she didn't talk about her vision for the first 100 days. She asked about the people who had been with the company for more than 20 years. She wanted to know the name of the head machinist on the factory floor. She had that look in her eyes, the one I remembered seeing in my own reflection in a dark office window at 2 a.m. 30 years ago. It was the hunger to create something that lasts. The day I offered her the job, we stood in the CEO's office. The large desk, which had once seemed like Daniel's throne, now just looked like a piece of furniture waiting for a purpose. "This is a great responsibility," Eleanor said, looking out at the city skyline. "It is," I agreed. "And it's a great privilege. Don't ever confuse the two. My son did." She turned to me, her expression serious. "Thank you for this opportunity, Catherine. I won't let you down." "You won't be working for me, Eleanor," I said, placing the office keycard in her hand. "You'll be working for them, for everyone in this building and in our factories across the country. Never forget that." On my last day, 6 months after that fateful board meeting, I quietly submitted my resignation from the board of directors. My work was done. The ship was not only steady, it was on a better course. I left without a party or a farewell speech. I just packed the few personal items from the small office I'd been using, shook Eleanor's hand, and walked out through the lobby the same way I had walked in. This time the young receptionist smiled a genuine, knowing smile. "Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Sterling." He called, of course, Daniel. It was a few weeks after the news of Eleanor's appointment had become public. His voice was subdued, tentative. He had heard through the grapevine that the company's performance was already improving. "Mom," he said, I just wanted to say, I'm glad things are going well." It was an olive branch, of a sort, a clumsy attempt to bridge the chasm between us. "The company is in good hands," I replied, my voice polite, neutral. I was sitting on my patio, looking at my roses. Their scent filled the warm afternoon air. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he continued, "about what I said, what I did. I was wrong. I'm sorry." The words I had once longed to hear now felt strangely hollow. "I accept your apology, Daniel," I said, and I meant it. I was his mother. Forgiveness was a part of that. But trust was a different matter. Trust was a business asset, and he had squandered it. "I hope you find your own path. I truly do." There was a long silence on the line. I think he was waiting for an invitation, a suggestion that his path might one day lead back here, to me, to the company. I didn't offer one. Some doors, once closed, must remain closed to protect what is inside. We ended the call with quiet, sad civilities. I felt a sense of peace, not of victory. I had mourned the loss of the son I thought I had, and now I was simply letting go. The first dividend check under the new leadership was substantial. I looked at the number, at the string of zeros, and I didn't see a windfall. I saw an opportunity. I saw a beginning. I called Arthur the next day. "I want to start a foundation," I told him. We called it the Sterling Initiative. Its mission was simple: to provide seed money and mentorship to young entrepreneurs who had a great idea but lacked the connections and the capital to get started. I rented a small, bright office downtown, a world away from the corporate polish of Sterling Enterprises. It smelled of fresh paint and new coffee. Our first recipient was a young woman, barely 25, with a brilliant plan for a sustainable packaging company. She reminded me so much of myself, the same nervous energy, the same fire in her eyes, the same detailed business plan clutched in her hands. When I handed her the check, the first grant from my foundation, she started to cry. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, wiping her eyes. No one has ever believed in me like this." "I do," I said, smiling. "I know exactly what it feels like to be the only one in the room who sees the future. Now go and build it." A photographer from a local business journal captured the moment. A few weeks later, a friend sent me the article. The photo was on the front page. It was of me, an old woman with graying hair, handing a check to a young woman on the verge of her future. My smile was genuine, unforced. I looked at happy. I looked at peace. I framed it and put it on the mantel in my library, next to a picture of my late husband. The old, worn folio with the original founding documents of Sterling Enterprises was back in the safe, its work done. My legacy, I realized, was not that single, towering company. It wasn't the son who bore my name. It was the act of building itself. My real legacy was the spark, the fire of creation. I had spent my life building one great fortress. Now my purpose was to give 1,000 other builders the tools to lay their own first stones. My son said he founded his business from scratch. In a way, he was right. The day I walked into that boardroom, I showed him what true scratch looks like. It is the hollowed-out feeling of having everything you thought was yours stripped away, leaving you with nothing but the truth. And then, from that 0 point, I started building again. But this time, I was building for the ones who know and will never forget the true price of that very first stone.